Now, Sports Central, we go over our next scheduled preview of this offseason, and it's compared to the North Carolina Tar Heels, team that went 6-7 overall in the 2021 season. Kind of a disappointing season for the Tar Heels, and whether or not you're a Tar Heel fan, I'm sure you can agree with that statement, as this team had some outstanding talent last season, and they were widely expected to be a major ACC contender and potentially a dark horse college football playoff contender, but in the end, this team ended up going 6-7. But how this team be in 2022, that's what we'll be going over here today. We'll be going over the players this team will be losing, will they be returning, and also looking at their schedule for the first time this offseason, starting out with their notable games from last season. And this team from the start of the year, when they played Virginia Tech in Week 1, lost that game 10-17. And that was quite an upset at the time. If you remember Week 1, I think North Carolina was ranked number 10 in that matchup. I mean, they were in the top 10 heading into the season, and rightfully so. I mean, with Sam Howell coming back, the amount of talent offensively coming back as well. I mean, there was reason to believe why this team would be potentially a national contender, but they lost their Week 1 matchup. That was a huge upset, only scoring 10 points against the Hokies there. And honestly, from there on, I mean, North Carolina, this team just was not very impressive in September. Then in October, got a huge win over Miami, 45-42. That game was a higher scoring matchup for sure, but the Tar Heels got a huge win in a close game. And they also beat Wake Forest. That was a big win. Wake Forest was a good team last season, beat them 58-55. They lost to Pittsburgh on the road 23-30. Pitt was a good team last season, and honestly, the ACC really did not go according to many expectations. I mean, it looked like your big three in the ACC were going to be Clemson, North Carolina, and Miami heading into the 2021 season. Turns out it was Pitt, NC State, and Wake Forest pretty much, and you could consider Clemson. They did improve for sure over the course of the season. But yeah, the ACC was definitely surprising last year. And of course, North Carolina, they also lost to NC State on the road, speaking of which, 30-34. That was the last game of the regular season. They lost their bowl game to South Carolina 21-38. So a brutal loss there to finish out the season against South Carolina. So 6-7 was the record last year. Once again, just a disappointing season. 3-3 in their first 6 games, and then 3-4 in their last 7. Roster preview going into the next season. Looking forward to 2022. Sam Howell will not be returning. And, I mean, he was a quarterback. If you remember way back to his first season with this team in 2019, I mean, he threw 38 touchdowns and 7 interceptions. That was his true freshman season. And it was outstanding what he did for this team. And his stats were outstanding. And going into 2020, the expectations were very high. And overall, he had a good season in 2020 as well. I mean, his completion rate was much higher than 2019. And overall, his stats were pretty good. But in 2021, I don't know what happened with him. But he definitely, this was his worst season of the 3 that he played with for North Carolina in 2021. 3,000 yards, 24 touchdowns, 9 picks, and a 62% completion rate. So, I mean, those aren't terrible stats. I mean, some teams would love to have stats like that out of their quarterback, but Sam Howell, passing-wise last season, was not very good. Rushing-wise, he rushed for over 800 yards and 11 touchdowns, so you can't forget that he's a dual-threat quarterback. So, I mean, is he an outstanding player? For sure. I feel like he's got tremendous talent and definitely some big upside going into the NFL, but I mean, it was a tough way to end his career with the Tar Heels in 2021, when I feel like this team could have 10-11 wins. I mean, that could have happened for this team last year based on the amount of talent they had coming back from 2020. Ty Chandler, the top running back on this team, is also gone. 1,300 yards last year, 14 touchdowns. That'll be a tough loss. Ty Chandler had a huge part in the backfield, and if you look at the rest of the players who rushed last season in the backfield, you got DJ Jones and then British Brooks. Brooks is returning, 295 yards last year and 4 touchdowns. Not a bad season for him. He'll likely be the top running back in the position, but we'll see what happens as the offseason progresses. Receiving core, Josh Downs is coming back. Antoine Green is also coming back, your top 2 receivers. Josh Downs last year had a great year, 1,300 yards and 8 touchdowns of offense last season. Then Green had just over 600 and then 5 touchdowns. So receiving core looks good. I will say that. I do think the receiving core has got some good depth going into next season. But the backfield, of course, there's a question mark there with Ty Chandler leaving. And then, of course, the quarterback position is also a concern. There's probably going to be more of an inexperienced quarterback under center for this team next season, considering Sam Howell will not be on this team. So, I mean, North Carolina, this team I feel like still's got potential going into next season. They got talent for sure, but I mean, it's a lot more questionable going into 2022 versus how it felt like going into 2021. They lose 3 on the offensive line as well, so that's something to keep an eye on. You lose 1 defensive lineman, 1 linebacker, and then 1 in the secondary. So defensively looks pretty good. You do return most of your key players defensively, but once again on the offense, a couple of skill players and a couple of positions definitely are questionable. So defensively, they got some upside, a few key losses offensively, but will this team be an ACC contender in 2022? 2021 did not work out for this team, but heading into 2022, I feel like this team, they got upside. I feel like, and we'll get into the recruiting here in a second, but I mean, I feel like North Carolina, don't count this team out just because they're losing a couple of key players. I mean, I still feel like this team is, they're worthy of being a contender in the ACC, but certainly a few of those questionable positions definitely need to be filled in a good way going into next season if this team wants to be a contender. Transfer portal and recruiting, this team does lose multiple players, multiple key players to the transfer portal. Of course, you got Cameron Roseman, safety, who is in the transfer portal. Yeah, Roseman Sinclair, we don't know where he's going quite yet, but he was a 4-star out of high school and played some for this team last season. Spencer Rolland is coming in, offensive tackle from Harvard. You lose Emery Simmons, receiver to Indiana. Eugene Asante, linebacker to Auburn. You got Gaynor, a offensive line from Miami, coming in. You also got linebacker Taylor coming in from Virginia. Trey Morrison, defensive backs, off to Oklahoma. And then Tyrone Hopper, linebacker, is off to Missouri. So you lose a few players, but you also bring in a few players that could potentially be starters next season. Recruiting-wise, this team is number 11 in the nation. So recruiting-wise, actually looks really good for this team going into next season. They're second in the ACC, I believe, only behind Clemson. They got 2 5-stars coming in, 8 4-stars coming in as well. So recruiting-wise, looks pretty good, I will say, for North Carolina. I do feel like this team is, I mean, if you're looking at the recruiting, I mean, that's definitely a positive going into next season, and that brings some optimism for me when looking at this North Carolina team. Is, I mean, they got some key players coming in recruiting wise, so that's definitely a great sign for the future. But that said, let's get to your schedule now going into next season. You start off the season in week 0 against Florida A&M at home. Then you got Appalachian State on the road on the 3rd of September, and then Georgia State on the road as well. So you got 2 of your first 3 games of the season on the road, to App State and then to Georgia State. You got Notre Dame coming to town on the 24th, and then Virginia Tech after that. You got Miami on the road, Duke on the road, then your bye week, and then you play Pitt at home. You got Virginia on the road, Wake Forest on the road, then Georgia Tech and NC State, both at home to finish out the season. So looking at the first half of your schedule here, Florida A&M, easy win there. App State, with it being on the road, plus App State is one of the better teams in the Sun Belt, and I do expect that for next season again. I do think that game could potentially be closer, but I'm definitely favoring the Tar Heels right now. But I will put it in yellow because it's a road game against a decent team. Georgia State, not too concerned about that one. I'll put that as an easy win. Notre Dame, now the Fighting Irish going into next season, also a team that I do feel like is tough to predict. They could be really good. They could certainly be a national contender, but at the same time, with the talent that they're losing after 2021, I wouldn't be surprised if it was more of a rebuilding season for the Fighting Irish. But nonetheless, I'm going to favor Notre Dame. They're barely in that matchup. Virginia Tech at home, I'll favor North Carolina there, but certainly a close one. That should be a good matchup between 2 teams I do expect to be pretty evenly matched. Then you got Miami on the road on the 8th of October. I'm going to favor the Hurricanes there. It's on the road. Miami should be decent next year. I wouldn't be surprised if the Hurricanes they're kind of a dark horse team in the ACC. I feel like, I mean, they're losing some talent, but they certainly return some key players. I feel like I've got some good upside. And so Hurricanes could be a good team next season. We'll have to see what happens there. But second half of the season, Duke on the road, I'll put that as I'll definitely favor North Carolina there going on the road. But I'm going to put it in yellow just because it's a road game. Pitt, honestly, Pittsburgh probably won't be quite as good next year versus how they were in 2021. They were a good team last season. Kenny Pickett had a huge part in that. He had an outstanding season for Pitt. And of course, he's now gone. So that certainly is going to have an impact. I feel like Pitt won't be quite as good, so I'll favor North Carolina there. Virginia on the road, I'll favor North Carolina there as well. Then you got Wake Forest on the road. Wake Forest could be good next season again. I feel like this team, I mean, they definitely surprised last year. Wake Forest did, and they're returning some key players. And I feel like Wake Forest, they're in a really good spot going into next season. So I'm going to favor them barely in that matchup. Georgia Tech, easy win. And then NC State to finish out the season. I'm going to favor the Wolfpack barely in that matchup. I feel like NC State next year is I mean, that team is probably, Clemson and NC State are my two favorite teams in the ACC going into next season. NC State looks really good. They're returning a lot of key players, and they're kind of slept on last season as well. I do feel like they're kind of in a background position at the ACC, but not next year. I feel like next year they're going to be at the top, and NC State, that is a team to watch out for, and I'm going to favor the Wolfpack barely in that matchup. So record projection 6-6 to 9-3 for this team. I feel like that's kind of a fair range for this team, considering this team is going to be a bit younger next season in some positions, and it still could be a good season. I wouldn't be surprised if this team got 8 or 9 wins, but I just don't think this is going to be their year, if any, to win the ACC. But that said, let me know your thoughts in the comments below on this team, and I appreciate you guys watching as always. Stay tuned for more from All Sports Central. Catch you on the next one.